Welcome to Talking Tech Journeys, hosted by me, Ben Whiteley of BPM Tech. We're delighted to bring you season 1 of Talking Tech Journeys. The aim is clear, to bring you some of the most engaging and respected figures within tech and transformation, providing a snapshot of their journeys to share knowledge, ideas and insights on all things tech and transformation. Sit back, relax and enjoy the journey. Hi, welcome to Talking Tech Journeys. I'm Ben Whiteley and I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Paul Upton, digital health tech entrepreneur and co-founder of Ultramed, an award-winning digital health company specializing in pre-operative assessments. Ultramed provide health technology for people and are on a mission to empower patients through technology and freeing healthcare teams to do what matters, caring for their patients. Hi, Paul. How are things?
Good morning, Ben. I'm very well, thanks. Hope you're well too.
Absolutely. Good. Many thanks for joining and looking forward to exploring your journey from anaesthetist to CEO and co-founder of Ultramed. So let's jump straight into it and take you back. How, why, when did you sort of first become interested in health and technology?
Well, the health bit's sort of easy, really, because sort of my father was a GP, in fact, and I was brought up in a sort of, medical household. Both my parents were really keen that I did something other than medicine for some reason or another.
Okay, right.
But,
Interesting.
but I was passionate about it,
Yeah.
and I did look at other careers, but thought, no, I've got to do medicine. It just looks fascinating academically, but also
Yeah.
in what you're doing to help people.
Mm-hmm.
However, he was a GP.
Okay.
I turned out to be an anaesthetist, and they're about as far across the spectrum of health as you can get. So anaesthetists like sort of immediate things happening, people going to sleep,
Yeah.
people waking up, changing your heart rate, sort of all of that sort of stuff. And so that's an interest in technology. But as I progressed through my career, I became very interested in sort of the processes in hospitals,
Okay. Yeah.
and some of the electronic sort of stuff that was coming in terms of digitalizing things. And I was responsible for bringing e-prescribing, electronic prescribing into my hospital. And I became the medical director in charge of the medical staff.
Brilliant. Well, no doubt we'll sort of cover that a bit further down the line. So just sort of taking you back, really, I mean, in terms of your first job, how did this sort of shape you and set you on your journey today?
My first job, well, sort of as a medical, sort of with a medical degree, you go through sort of various training sort of levels. And I did what were called then house jobs, one in London and one down in Poole in Dorset, where I came from. And then subsequently, I came down to Cornwall to do a job, a medical job. So that's being a physician. And I'd always wanted to sort of explore the anaesthetic bit, and I started my anaesthetic career down in Cornwall before moving to Oxford as a registrar. I had an amazing year in South Africa, working in Soweto.
Right.
Quite a wildly different from the NHS. And then I got my final training in Bristol before returning to Cornwall as a consultant.
Brilliant. And that obviously then leads you into, your career of sort of, well, within the clinical NHS journey and sort of spanning 30 years. So it'd be great just to sort of understand your clinical journey and how sort of science, technology and advancements have sort of aided that journey over your tenure.
Yes, well, my career sort of was clinically based, but I then had lots of other sort of bits that I did as I went on. I was very involved in setting up the Peninsula Medical School, and I was the sub-dean in my hospital, and ended up actually writing the curriculum for the whole Southwest that covered the Peninsula Medical School. So I was a sort of academic sort of leaning.
Yeah.
But I then was really interested in governance and the processes around education. And that led me to take a senior medical management post. And from that, I then became the medical director. And one of the things that I was seeing there was the sort of problems that you have in a hospital with paper-based notes. And that's where my interest in health informatics really started to sort of grow. And in fact, in 2014, I won a national award for clinical informatics leadership for some of the things that I was sort of exploring and trying to do in the hospital.
So, I mean, I know it's obviously difficult and you've got a sort of a very varied background. What were the sort of the key challenges that you sort of coming up against in terms of, the biggest barriers in terms of innovation, transformation, change in terms of technology?
Well, it's very difficult to change things from within the NHS.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big organisation. It's always been cash strapped.
Yeah.
And it's very tricky to sort of, really get to the position where you can actually, really make things change. Um, I'd done sort of some of that, but I then had become interested in preoperative assessment. That was part of my
Mm-hmm.
clinical background. And I had this a chance meeting on an aeroplane with a guy. He was sat sort of on my left-hand side. He was reading a boat magazine, and we were flying from Gatwick down to Newquay. And I thought he was coming down for the weekend from London to sail, but actually it turned out that both of us had boats, and they were very close to each other in the marina. And
Interesting.
his skill set is completely different to mine.
Mm-hmm.
So Alan's a creative designer, but also ran his own company. And so if you take his career, creative design, his business acumen and experience,
Yeah.
my NHS management piece and the clinical experience, and you put those together and stir, all sorts of things happened.
Yeah.
And I'd had an idea about sort of the paper-based preoperative
Mm.
assessments that were going on, which I'd been trying to change but got nowhere doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought I can do that with Alan. And what we did was we sat in his design studio. Uh, we had a whiteboard. We mocked up sort of, the flow of what we wanted to do. We then did a bit of market research about what was out there. There was some evidence that the NHS could save 65 million a year if it
Wow.
adopted digital preoperative assessment. And we
Mm.
thought, well, we've just got to do this. So
Mm.
we did.
So that was sort of the I suppose the light bulb moment, and you're referring to Alan Saunders there, the other sort of co-founder at Ultramed.
Yeah, that's right. And sort of the two of us are, quite different, but we
Yeah.
get on extremely well together. And because we've got different skill sets, we just
Mm.
have a different focus on different bits of the business, and that's allowed us to develop. Neither of us are particularly technical.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter would tell you that I can barely turn my smartphone on, and she's probably not too
Yeah.
far wrong. Um, but that doesn't mean that you can't run a tech organization, because you surround yourself by people that are better than you, and
Yeah.
build a team,
Mm.
and lead them.
Mm. Which it would be interesting to sort of get your gist, and we'll sort of come on to that in terms of the attributes and mix of an entrepreneur. So yeah, we'll sort of come back to that if that's good. So just in terms of turning your thoughts to 2014, the beginning of Ultramed. I mean, just for the viewers, it'd be great just for a brief summary and overview of who Ultramed are and sort of problems that you tackle.
Yeah, so Ultramed is a group of people, now a team. I lead that team,
Mm.
and we're growing rapidly. And as you'll hear, we've won sort of all sorts of awards for
Yeah.
some of our efforts. But most importantly, sort of, we're providing service back into the NHS. And we currently are active. We've got contracts with 25 NHS trusts, and we've got about 320,000 patients who've used our most recent version of the platform for
Hmm.
preoperative assessments.
Brilliant. So all from a chance meeting with Alan, and obviously from some scribbling on a whiteboard. So it's amazing how sort of things take shape. I mean, obviously taking you back to those sort of early days. You've touched on supplying into the NHS. I mean, what was there sort of, was there any sort of pushback or thought in terms of, obviously you touched on the preoperative side of offering online service platform as opposed to sort of the traditional more face-to-face service?
Yes, well, it's an interesting journey. So
Mm.
Alan and I incorporated the company. We had a small grant, but we did what's called bootstrapping, where actually the co-founders put their hands in their pockets and invest in their business. And from that, we then got a small group of angel investors investing, and that used the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, which is an amazing way of raising money, because ultimately the investor gets 50% tax relief.
Okay.
And you can't raise much money on it relatively, but it is an extremely powerful way of getting people to take risk with very early startups. And that gave us the resource to get to a minimum viable product. And we did that by outsourcing our software development to a great team called Buzz Interactive, who are based in Newquay. They built us that MVP. We then did a Crowdcube fundraise. Once we'd got our first revenues, we needed more funding, and we went on to Crowdcube. We were trying to raise £100,000. We got that by day 3.
Right. Okay.
We went on to raise £317,000, and we closed on day 22 out of the normal window that you're open for 30 days. And for me, this is one of the most powerful stories, because 500 people, our 500 shareholders, put their hands in their pockets because they could see what we were trying to do in terms of improving experience. They're not doctors, they're not nurses, they've not worked in the NHS. They're people who've had preoperative assessments, normally paper-based, many of them having to go to hospital completely unnecessarily to be asked a whole pile of questions. And that I think is really important in terms of, identifying that we were on to something important here in terms of people's experiences.
Yeah. And in terms of, obviously, you've been part of sort of incubator, accelerator programs, the NHS Innovation Accelerator and IEA, the Innovate UK Scale Up program, recognised by the Department of International Trade as one of the top sort of 100 digital health companies in 2021. I mean, obviously you've mentioned some of the grants available and the sort of programs and like say incubators. What are these sort of why are the programs sort of so successful in driving innovation, and how have they sort of benefited you as a digital health tech entrepreneur?
Well, there's a range of different things. The grants are grants; they come with money, and sort of you've applied for them, and you've got a product development sort of piece. The accelerators and programs like that are all about support, and they're about sort of having an independent view of your business, about what you're doing well. Have you got your pricing right? Have you got your marketing strategy right? Have you got your organizational development plan set? So they're really helpful in terms of guiding a startup, and just pointing out some of the things that you can get wrong very easily if you're not taking advice.
Yeah. So is it? I know it's sort of starter, but does it include sort of scale up at exit and the whole sort of entrepreneurial sort of piece?
Yeah, well, they're different sort of programs. So the NHS Innovation Accelerator is for companies that have got evidence of a viable product that's already in the NHS and is ready to scale. And so it helps open doors. And of course, having that badge is really helpful, because it gives you credibility that you've been sort of assessed as ready to scale into the NHS.
Yeah.
The Innovate UK scale-up program is completely different. It's covering companies in all different sort of areas of business. And there it's about your organizational development. What are your key barriers that you're facing? Sort of, is it export? Is it sort of the ability to scale your team if and when you win big contracts? And they're very experienced sort of business leaders, which is different from the NHS Accelerator, which is all about the NHS.
Yeah. Interesting. So just in terms of, obviously, going back to Ultramed, in terms of some of the case studies, partnerships, collaborations with the NHS that you're most sort of proud of, and are you able to sort of discuss some of the results, outcomes that you've achieved over this time?
Yeah, so the relationships are generally sort of, we're a supplier. The
Yeah.
NHS trusts our
Hmm.
customers. So there's a conventional sort of business to business
Hmm.
relationship there.
Yeah.
But there is partnership because with the product, my pre-op, for instance,
Mm.
when a hospital's implementing it, it's going to look at, what we've built
Yeah.
in terms of the questions that patients are being asked. And people always come up with good ideas.
Mm.
And so we build those in, and that sort of partnership working with sort of our customers is really important about keeping
Mm.
product really fresh and driving forwards.
Yeah. I was going to sort of ask you, how do you sort of keep, ahead in terms of, the sort of, I'm assuming it's sort of iterative changes in terms of the product and the actual fit and suitability for, the clinicians and the NHS.
Yes, well, those are sort of, those are iterative, but
Mm.
we went through sort of quite big chunks of activity. So the first MVP was about an online questionnaire that patients filled in.
Mm.
When it came back to the hospital, it was then an editable PDF that the
Okay.
hospital staff could then sort of do and then file as a completed preoperative assessment. But the second stage of development was building a portal.
Hmm.
And that's all about managing the numbers of patients that are going through a hospital and the flow of those patients. So I was at the Royal Cornwall Hospital, 20,000 operations a year. So you imagine sort of keeping track of
Yeah.
20,000 people going through, who's got their operations coming up soonest, how many people are
Mm.
waiting for a blood test or an echo or another opinion. That's quite important to manage, and ultimately it has an impact on getting patients into operating theatres, because being able to
Yeah.
identify the patients who are cleared through their preoperative assessment is really important. And we've built that sort of platform. The next stage of development is taking it from a single assessment before you have a
Hmm.
preoperative assessment to
Yeah.
multiple assessments. So one of the issues that's happened with COVID is that the waiting list, that's the
Hmm.
list of patients waiting for
Yeah.
elective procedures, has gone from 4 million to 8 million. And so the concern is what happens to people who are waiting for a long time for operations,
Mm.
and the risk to them as they wait.
Yeah. Sure.
So what's been mandated is an initial check-in as soon as a patient's told they need an operation, a health screener, and then regular check-ins every 3 months to make sure that they're safe whilst they're waiting, and then the
Hmm.
full pre-op assessment. And that's what we've
Yeah.
built as the latest phase of the product, and that's called My Pre-op Plus.
Hmm.
We've just won our first contract with it, and we're also rolling that out to our existing customer base. And it's all about
Real.
pre-operative journey, but
Yeah.
it's a much longer pathway than just the immediate bit before the operation.
Yeah. So I mean, it's probably sort of a win-win in terms of hospital efficiencies, in terms of the clinicians, but then obviously in terms of sort of the patient care. I mean, do you have any sort of tangible outcomes in terms of how many sort of patients that a typical hospital was processing prior and obviously after using the software and service that you guys provide?
Yeah, it's sometimes very difficult to sort of, nail the
Yeah.
savings efficiency benefits, but one of our customers, London Northwest
Mm.
Trust, put a huge amount of effort into understanding what was happening once they introduced my pre-op.
Mm.
And the bottom line of it was the service they found a 40% increase in capacity
Right. Well.
within 8 months of introducing my pre-op. And that's got a sort of, pound notes
Yeah.
associated with it
Absolutely.
in terms of savings.
Yeah. No. Well. Yeah. No doubt. Quite significant to, like I say, improving, the clinical sort of care, but also then the patient outcomes as well, which is major benefit.
Yeah, that's more difficult at this stage to show. But what
Mm.
we have just done is we've won a Innovate UK grant.
Right.
It's a biomedical catalyst grant, which are for,
Hmm.
high performing sort of
Yeah.
um, companies working at the sort of cutting edge of sort of medical research, really. And although it's a digital health product, it still has got this impact that it can have on healthcare.
Right.
And what we've won the grant for is to be able to get better information about Ben, for instance, when he's coming for his operation, from your GP record, from the hospital
Yeah.
service. Better profile of Ben. We know what operation he's having. Collect outcome data. So how long did it take you to get back to work? That's a different
Yeah.
question from whether you survived your operation, which is about the level of some of the detail. But, you know, what was it like when you were getting better? And from that, what can we do with AI to
Yeah.
look at the risk profile for each person going through their perioperative pathway? So it's really exciting sort of future development of both product and improving service.
So, you know, like you said, you just touched on there in terms of the sort of future, a mix of, you know, AI, but also there's a lot of talk around sort of the data side, and obviously using data as a sort of a enabler to pretty much sort of drive those sorts of efficiencies. Is that the sort of is that where you're going in terms of, you know, some of the sort of challenges and, you know, the, I suppose, opportunities down at Ultramed, and where you see, you know, the future of digital health and the sort of services that you guys are offering?
Yes, it is. One has to be really careful with patient data, of course. It's sort
Yeah,
of, you know, it's confidential to that individual and must be
absolutely.
only used for the right purposes.
Mm,
But in terms of, you know, auditing the efficiency of a particular service, then that's, you know, that's normal practice.
yeah.
As soon as you stray into sort of, you know, changing clinical practice, you know, that's when it becomes a research project. So we've got to be very clear about
Mm,
the sort of way data is used and be very careful with it. You've seen sort of big companies getting into all sorts of bother
yeah,
because
yeah.
they've used data inappropriately.
No,
Um,
absolutely.
so with that caution, the answer, of course, is yes. You know, there are lots of opportunities to do things. And one of the things we've been doing is building a dashboard reporting system to identify patients with diabetes who are at the highest risk.
Right.
Um, and that's sort of, you know, helping hospitals to identify high risk patients early on in their journey. And this Innovate UK grant that I was talking about
Yeah, yeah,
has a particular focus around diabetes and those with a high BMI, body mass index.
yeah.
So they're overweight patients.
Interesting. And I know obviously, you know, innovation is key to success. And I know one of the proudest times and achievements was the King's Award for Enterprise. So I can't, you know, have you and host you without obviously talking about, I think it was 2023. So yeah, what sort of influence has that had on as you personally, but obviously as a business?
Well, the reason you apply for them is the first thing to
Yeah.
say. It's a rigorous application process. They say they recommend sort of 40 to 100 hours of time to sort of get the application in.
Mm.
You know, dare I say, having worked in the public sector, I'm quite good at filling forms in.
Yeah, yeah.
So I applied for it. Support from some of my key senior team.
Mm.
But we then applied, and lo and behold, I got an email which says sort of, you know, at the recommendation of the Prime Minister, the King is awarding you this. Amazing.
Wow.
Um, and what's so powerful about it is that my team, you know, many of them are really quite young and early in their
Mm.
careers, working for a company and contributing to winning a King's Award for Enterprise
Yeah,
rests so well on your CV. Um,
absolutely.
we've been incredibly lucky to appoint the people that we have in our team. But we have found that our ability to recruit has been enormously improved. We're just taking on 7 more employees as a result of a big contract win and the Innovate UK grant.
Brilliant.
And we've recruited superb individuals. And just to give you an example, one of
Mm.
those managerial posts had over 500 applicants.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
we've had one other post that actually had more than 1,000 people apply. So that's a big
Very in
impact.
demand. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are a number of reasons for that. Obviously, the King's Award is important, but we're an entirely virtual company.
Yeah.
We have flexible working hours, 10 till 4 are the core hours. We have a profit share. We have well-being packages.
Yeah.
And we're actually carrying out a very interesting trial at the moment of a 9-day working fortnight.
I
Um,
saw that. Yeah. I think it's you sort of midway through that. So I mean, how have you found that, and is that
but,
something that's going to be rolled out moving forward?
well, I can't answer the last question, but I can tell you that it's Friday, and that means that half the team are not
Ah,
here
okay,
and half
right.
the team are in. And so, as an individual, what it means is that you get a 3-day long weekend every
Yeah,
other week. Um,
yeah.
and there's some strong evidence out there that this sort of pattern of working improves
Mm,
productivity. Um, I think the important thing is that we don't lose productivity.
yeah, sure.
Equally, I was very concerned that, if you start to try and measure productivity,
Mm,
particularly as a totally remote company, you
yeah.
could end up with a log in, log out, clocking
Hmm.
in sort of culture. And that's absolutely not what we're trying to do here. Um,
Yeah,
you if you work virtually, you have to trust people. It's
sure.
absolute prerequisite. You never question sort of what they're doing, but you hope that they're sort of feel trusted, feel valued, and therefore perform well. And that's what we see.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I mean, the pandemic and COVID, a lot of businesses, in my world of recruitment, to be honest, it was quite foreign to them in terms of remote working. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule, but it's sort of almost going 360 again now, to be totally honest with you, in terms of businesses, had, you know, it was just locked down during COVID, so that they had no alternative. But there are some businesses who are trying to attract people back to offices more successfully than others. But like you said, Paul, it's all about that trust and ultimately productivity, and that instilling that culture and values, which by the sounds of it, you've nailed well. I mean, is there any secret in terms of obviously creating a successful culture? And we've touched on innovation. I mean, how do you sort of encourage innovation with the people?
Well, the first thing around culture is you have to put energy and,
Yeah,
frankly, some resource into it. We actually use Slack, which many of your
yeah.
listeners will be familiar with. We use their virtual donut coffee process, and
Hmm.
what that does is it automatically sends out an invite randomly for you to join up with another member of the team to
Uh-huh.
spend 30 minutes having a virtual coffee.
Yeah,
And by doing that, and that's not talking about work, you
yeah,
actually
yeah.
get to learn about each other a lot. And so that builds sort of some of those relationships. We have a team sort of all hands meeting, which is a fairly sort of structured meeting on a Monday. And then we have a catch up chat again, sort of, anybody got any difficulties they want help
Mm,
with on a Wednesday. So all of these things are really important in terms of building that culture, and then making sure that when you're recruiting the people that fit. Um,
yeah.
they've got to fit the culture. And in fact, this morning I was talking to a new employee who is
Mm.
joining us soon. And I've had absolutely nothing to do with his recruitment, but I was just delighted. And what a fit. He's just going to just be perfect joining the team.
Yeah. Well, again, talking our language, we do a lot around sort of what good looks like for organisations. And being totally honest with you, probably the biggest cost of recruitment is the risk of a bad hire. So it's good that you've got that sorted and nailed. I know that there's another sort of journey that you've been going on, which we've maybe not sort of touched on, is the B Corps, the B Corporation of in terms of the environmental, social, and governance factors. How's that sort of going for you?
Well, it's going well, but it's much more arduous than I thought it was going to be.
I thought
So
that'd be the answer. Yeah.
I had a rather naive view of it, was that we're a virtual company. We don't own a printer and we don't travel
Yeah.
anywhere. So we tick the box pretty easily.
Yeah.
Um, when we then unpacked the box and looked at what you needed to do, it's a heck of a task. So one of our teams led that process, and then supported by the senior management team. So we relatively easily got to 70 out of the 80 points that we needed before we could submit for
Yeah.
assessment. Closing the gap on the last 10 was much more challenging. But having said that, we got to 84 points and then submitted, and we're in the assessment piece now. You have to wait quite a while before you go into the assessment, but we're now in that sort of process. So hoping to hear that we've achieved B Corp fairly soon.
Good. Well, something to look forward to, and all the best with that. So, I mean, just in terms of, obviously, it's great to hear and understand, your journey along the way. I know we sort of touched on this briefly earlier, but really interested to find out, your opinion in what sort of factors make a great entrepreneur.
Well, I don't know whether I'm a great entrepreneur, but I can tell you sort of that, some of the things that you've got to be prepared to do. The first is you've got to take risk, because sort of, if you sit there on the fence and think, oh, well, I could do that, you've got to just go for it, because unless you do that, you'll never make it happen. You've got to be fairly resilient to the issues that you're going to come up against, fundraising, watching the bank account dwindle, worrying about sort of, employing people and the responsibility you therefore shoulder, worrying about product development and the progress that you're making with that. So there's a lot of things that are, worrying, but you have to try. I think the thing that I do reflect on is that people say to me, "Oh gosh, it must be terribly stressful running a company." Nothing like as stressful as being involved in the senior management of an NHS trust and clinical practice. So I'm doing this as a sort of semi-retirement sort of piece. It's not semi-retirement bit isn't going terribly well, because sort of I'm working quite a lot more hours than I'd intended to do. But equally, the team is growing. We've got an established senior management team. We'll have 21 employees and 3 half-time within the next couple of months. And as soon as you've got your structure and your organizational development plan, you get much more into a conducting role, leadership role. And that's so important. I love the phrase delegate and elevate. Because as soon as you can delegate sort of duties, tasks, responsibilities to a management team, then it frees you up to concentrate on the strategy. And the strategy is what you have to focus on, not the day-to-day running of the business.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs, and there's a lot of common themes which you sort of touched on there. I mean, it seems in health tech, healthcare, that it's almost find a problem that you're passionate about, and maybe have real life sort of frustrations, and ultimately solve it.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. It's fine having sort of, great thoughts and ideas, but if you're going to sell to the NHS, you have to have a problem that you're solving. It's got to be really connected. And if it isn't, you'll never get it past the sort of start position, because, nobody will buy it.
And I know from speaking to people in a similar situation to yourself who were within the NHS, some of the real, and I know we touched on this earlier, but the real frustrations and of actually being able to influence and innovate within the NHS, which I suppose there sort of comes a point of juggling those two, your clinical career within the NHS, whatever sort of walk of life and path that takes, turning it into a tech entrepreneur and really sort of having that sort of startup and mentality can often be quite a difficult sort of path to tread, but also, juggling of your day-to-day responsibilities, but then the spark of that idea into something that's an actual, ongoing sort of business. So how did you sort of overcome, I suppose, obviously, you'd finish your sort of journey within the NHS. So I suppose, time and really just juggling as to pulling from your experience was probably vitally important in that passion and ultimately understanding that the problem that you solve.
Yeah, I think sort of the key for me was the fact that actually sort of I was quite senior in the NHS. I was
Yeah.
able to actually retire early. Sort of, sometimes people think of entrepreneurs as being sort of 20 somethings. Doing it sort of, late 50s is sort of, a perfectly viable thing to do. You've got a lot of life experience. You probably
Sure.
have got some personal sort of resources that you can put into it. Which is really important, and then sort of having the freedom to actually enjoy doing what you're doing, without sort of risking your house on it, as it were, because sort of
Yeah.
often people earlier in their careers do end up risking their houses on things.
Yeah. I know you touched on it earlier, the sort of bootstrap option and angel investment. That is probably one thing that does divide when I do speak to, startups and entrepreneurs, in terms of obviously the sort of financial opportunities that are there, and that sort of risk reward, but also then time to market and everything else. So that is one thing that does seem to differ from person to person, which is interesting. But a lot of the traits that you've sort of touched on there, I love the delegate to elevate. It's quite prominent, and a lot of good takeaways. So thanks for that, Paul.
No, you're very welcome. It's been a very interesting conversation.
Yeah. Well, look, many thanks. And as I said, some really inspiring stuff there, and some great advice. And just lastly to the listeners, it'd be great to hear your views and opinions on the advice provided by Paul in scaling a health tech company. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed Talking Tech Journeys, and we'll catch you next time. Good company and colleagues in a career make the journey more rewarding. If you did enjoy, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favourite podcast platform. It really helps us reach more listeners like you. Don't forget to follow and join the Talking Tech Journeys the podcast group on LinkedIn, where you can join in debate and message us directly if you'd like to be considered as a guest, have any questions, comments, or topic suggestions. You can also email ben.whiteley@bpmtech.co.uk. Until next time, enjoy your journey.